Walden Pond by Henry David Thoreau. I went to the woods, said Henry David Thoreau, because I wished to live deliberately. The woods he went to were on the shores of Walden Pond near Concord, Massachusetts. For 2 years he lived alone in a cabin, only rarely receiving visitors or going to town. He spent his time observing the workings of nature, thinking and writing. In 1854 he published Walden, or Life in the Woods. The book, an American classic, celebrates the natural world as well as the ability of the individual to live free from the pressures and restrictions of society. In the following excerpt from Walden, Thoreau describes and muses upon the pond that gave his book its title. Standing on the smooth sandy beach at the east end of the pond in a calm September afternoon when a slight haze makes the opposite shoreline indistinct, I have seen, hence came the expression, the glassy surface of a lake. When you invert your head, it looks like a thread of finest gossamer stretched across the valley and gleaming against the distant pine woods, separating one stratum of the atmosphere from another. You would think that you could walk dry under it to the opposite hills, and that the swallows would skim over, might perch on it. Indeed, they sometimes dive below this line, as it were a mistake, and are undeceived. As you look over the pond westward, you are obliged to employ both your hands to defend your eyes against the reflected as well as the true sun, for they are equally bright, and if between the two you survey its surface critically, it is literally as smooth as glass, except where the skater insects at equal intervals scattered over its whole extent by their motions in the sun produce the finest imaginable spark on it, or perchance a duck plumes itself, or, as I have said, a swallow skims so low as to touch it. It may be that in the distance a fish describes an arc of 3 or 4 feet in the air, and there is one bright flash where it emerges, and another where it strikes the water. Sometimes the whole silvery arc is revealed, or here and there, perhaps, is a thistle down floating on its surface, which the fishes dart at and so dimple it again. It is like molten glass cooled but not congealed, and a few motes in it are pure and beautiful like the imperfections in glass. You may often detect a yet smoother and darker water, separated from the rest, as if by an invisible cobweb, boom of the water nymphs resting on it. From a hilltop you can see a fish leap in almost any part, for not a pickerel or shiner picks an insect from this smooth surface, but it manifestly disturbs the equilibrium of the whole lake. It is wonderful with what elaborateness the simple facts advertise. The piscine murder will out, and from a distant perch I distinguished the circling undulations when they were 6 rods in diameter. You can even detect a water bug ceaselessly progressing over the smooth surface 1/4 mile off, for they furrow the water slightly, making a conspicuous ripple bounded by 2 diverging lines, but the skaters glide over it without rippling it perceptibly. When the surface is considerably agitated, there are no skaters nor water bugs on it, but apparently, in calm days, they leave their havens and adventurously glide forth from the shore by short impulses till they completely cover it. It is a soothing employment, on one of those fine days in the fall when all the warmth of the sun is fully appreciated, to sit on a stump on such a height as this, overlooking the pond, and study the dimpling circles which are incessantly inscribed on its otherwise invisible surface amid the reflected skies and trees. Over this great expanse there is no disturbance, but it is thus at once gently smoothed away and assuaged, as, when a vase of water is jarred, the trembling circles seek the shore, and all is smooth again. Not a fish can leap or an insect fall in the pond, but it is thus reported in circling dimples and lines of beauty, as it were the constant welling up of its fountain, the gentle pulsing of its life, the heaving of its breast. The thrills of joy and thrills of pain are undistinguishable. Not a fish can leap or an insect fall on the pond, but it is thus reported in circling dimples and lines of beauty, as if it were a constant welling up of its fountain, the gentle pulsing of its life, the heaving of its breast. The thrills of joy and thrills of pain are indistinguishable. How peaceful the phenomena of the lake! Again, the works of man shine as in the spring. Aye, Every leaf and twig and stone and cobweb sparkles now at mid-afternoon as when covered with dew in a spring morning. Every motion of an oar or an insect produces a flash of light, and if an oar falls, how sweet the echo! In such a day in September or October, Walden is a perfect forest mirror, set round with stones as precious to my eye as if fewer or rarer. Nothing so fair, so pure, and at the same time so large as a lake, perchance lies on the surface of the earth. Sky water. It needs no fence. Nations come and go without defiling it. It is a mirror which no stone can crack, whose quicksilver will never wear off, whose gilding nature continually repairs. No storms, no dust can dim its surface ever fresh, a mirror of which all impurity, presented to it, sinks, swept and dusted by the sun's hazy brush. This is the light dust cloth, which retains no breath that is breathed on it, but sends it on to float as clouds high above its surface and be reflected in its bosom still. One November afternoon, in the calm at the end of a rainstorm of several days' duration, when the sky was still completely overcast and the air was full of mist, I observed that the pond was remarkably smooth, so that it was difficult to distinguish its surface, though it no longer reflected the bright tints of October, but the somber November colors of the surrounding hills. Though I passed over as gently as possible, the slight undulations produced by my boat extended almost as far as I could see, and gave a ribbed appearance to the reflections. But as I was looking over the surface, I saw here and there, at a distance, a faint glimmer, as if some skater insects which had escaped the frost might be collected there, or perchance the surface being so smooth, betrayed where a spring welled up from the bottom. Paddling gently to one of those places, I was surprised to find myself surrounded by myriads of small perch about 5 inches long, of a rich bronze color in the green water, sporting there and constantly rising to the surface and dimpling it, sometimes leaving bubbles on it. In such transparent and seemingly bottomless water reflecting the clouds, I seemed to be floating through the air as in a balloon, and their swimming impressed me as a kind of flight or hovering, as if they were a compact flock of birds passing just beneath my level on the right or left, their fins like sails set all around them. An old man who used to frequent this pond nearly 60 years ago, when it was dark with surrounding forest, tells me that in those days he sometimes saw it all alive with ducks and other waterfowl, and that there were many eagles about it. He came here a-fishing, and used an old log canoe which he found on the shore. It was made of 2 white pine logs dug out and pinned together, and was cut off square at the end. It was very clumsy, but lasted a great many years before it became waterlogged and perhaps sank to the bottom. He did not know whose it was. It belonged to the pond. He used to make a cable for his anchor of strips of hickory bark tied together. An old man, a potter, who lived by the pond before the Revolution, told him once that there was an iron chest at the bottom and that he had seen it. Perhaps it would come floating up to the shore, but when you went towards it, it would go back into the deep water and disappear. I was pleased to hear of the old log canoe, which took the place of an Indian one of the same material but more graceful construction, which perchance had first been a tree on the bank, and then, as it were, fell into the water, to float there for a generation, the most proper vessel for the lake. I remember when I first looked into these depths, there were many large trunks to be seen indistinctly lying on the bottom, which had either been blown over formerly, or left on the ice at the last cutting, when wood was cheaper, but now they have mostly disappeared. When I first paddled a boat on Walden, it was completely surrounded by thick and lofty pine and oak woods, and in some of its coves grapevines. And in some of its coves grapevines had run over the trees next the water and formed bowers under which a boat could pass. The hills which form its shores are so steep, and the woods on them were then so high, that, as you looked down from the west end, it had the appearance of an amphitheater for some kind of sylvan spectacle. I have spent many an hour when I was younger floating over its surface as a zephyr willed, having paddled my boat to the middle and lying on my back across the seats in a summer forenoon, dreaming awake, until I was aroused by the boat touching the sand, and I arose to see what shore my fates had impelled me to, days when idleness was the most attractive and productive industry. Many a forenoon have I stolen away, preferring to spend thus the most valued part of the day, for I was rich, if not in money, in sunny hours and summer days, and spent them lavishly. Nor do I regret that I did not waste more of them in the workshop or the teacher's desk. But since I left those shores, the wood choppers still have further laid them waste, and now for many a year there will be no more rambling through the aisles of the wood, with occasional vistas through which you see the water. My muse may be excused if she is silent henceforth. How can you expect the birds to sing when their grooves are cut down?